Well, I was thinking since I got the call at 5 o'clock a.m. this morning and have only had a couple hours, that we would spend maybe the next 30 minutes just sharing fun facts about avocados and walnut trees, because I'm studied up on that. I have a little bit of content on that. No, I love you guys so much because I don't think I've had more conversations about avocados and walnut trees ever in my life than I've had in the last 2 weeks. And I know some of you were very angry at me because I ruined walnut trees for you. I kind of defamed the name of walnut trees. I just want to tell you, I love walnuts. I eat them in my oatmeal every morning for breakfast. I love walnuts. But it was so funny. I had different people text me fun facts about avocados. I learned this week that avocados have been around since the time of dinosaurs. I did not know that. And that they don't ripen until they fall off the tree and all sorts of other fun stuff. But I think Lisa Null wins the prize for me. She bought me this little thing, which, there you go. So, avocado shooter. I've been tormenting my kids with this all week long, chasing them around the house. So thank you, Lisa, for that gift. But man, I love, this is the power of story and illustration, right? It's what sticks with us. It's what we can grab onto. But so 2 weeks ago when I preached, we talked about the tale of two trees, right? Kind of the tree of real faith, which produces the fruit of good works or good deeds. And the tree of kind of fake faith or not fake faith that doesn't result in that. Well, this morning, we're going to kind of continue that theme of two options, and today is the tale of two paths, or two choices, okay, as we get to James 3:13. And again, I've only been preparing these last couple hours, so lots of grace, and this is going to be fun. I'm going to just kind of be raw and unplugged. We're going to share the passage, and then I'm just going to kind of riff on it a little bit and share thoughts as we dig into that. So feel free to get out your Bibles or your sermon notes. Turn to James 3, starting in verse 13. We'll be reading from the New International Version this morning. So James chapter 3, starting in verse 13. I'll read a verse or two and kind of share some thoughts as we go. Verse 13, who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. Sound familiar? Kind of that same theme that James is talking about. If you have wisdom, if you have faith, then show it by good deeds, by your good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Let me pause there for a second. Kind of in your notes or in your Bibles, I invite you to circle or underline the words bitter envy and selfish ambition. This is kind of the thread that James is going to be working on through this passage. Bitter envy, selfish ambition. And as I thought about this, you take those two phrases, what does that remind you of? I would say that describes our country and our culture pretty well these days, wouldn't you say? Bitter envy. The first thing I think of when I think of bitter envy is social media. Like, when I think about social media, oftentimes it becomes this massive comparison fest, right? We kind of put our best foot forward, our best look forward on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and really, like, that's not a great representation of our lives, right? I've actually thought, I don't know what is up with my hair, but I have maybe some of the most epic bedhead every morning that a person could have. When I wake up, I've thought about taking pictures and chronicling the different hairstyles I wake up with. Like, social media doesn't give you that look, right? It doesn't give you the, hey, I just woke up and I'm going to snap a picture of myself and show the world, right? Before I've, gotten ready or showered or put on makeup. Like, no, social media is, we want to present this image, this put-together picture of ourselves. And what happens out of that is then we compare, right? We compare to other people. We look at their life and how good they look, how much fun it looks like they're having. Oh, they traveled to this place, they did this thing, and we have we compare to them. We have envy of what they have. And if you guys remember back to, I think it was this past summer, when I preached a sermon on social media, I read so many stats that week that talked about how much depression and low self-esteem that social media is creating. Because we see these idealized pictures and we compare our life to that, and we're like, my life looks nothing like that. So I think that social media has continued to breed this culture that's already was there in our country of bitter envy, of wanting what that person has, wanting what that life that I see in these pictures, that life that I kind of see on the outside. And then selfish ambition. Man, I grieve the way that our country is going. I fear that selfishness is not only increasing, but is being celebrated. Like that's what we look at as this is the life that I want to pursue. This is the American dream, is just this very selfish life that just kind of steps on everyone or disregards everyone to try to get mine and get what I want. And one of the places I see this the most is in parking lots, right? I'm 35. I haven't been on this earth super long, but I feel like there's been this change in parking lots where like I almost get run over by cars all the time now as a pedestrian. It's like I'm pretty sure I read in the driver's training, driver's ed, that you're supposed to yield to pedestrians, but people are just on a mission and they're focused on their own stuff, and there's not much regard for other people. Someone was just telling me last night that I was at Chuck E. Cheese for a child's birthday party, which is a whole other story of chaos and insanity. But someone was going in to park. He was ready to pull into a spot, and someone just rushed in right in front of him and pulled in and took their spot from him. I see that not just there, but all over the place. We're focused on ourselves. It's like we have these blinders on that we don't really pay attention to or care about often what's going on in other people's lives. We're focused on our own lives and what we care about, our own interests. And so I read these words, and the first time I read these words this week, I thought, oh my gosh, that's our country. That's what we've become. Envy, jealousy, comparison, and selfish ambition. I'm just out to advance myself. I'm out to get whatever I can. Let's read on and see how James describes this. Such wisdom, he puts in quotation marks, does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Oof. Man. This type of approach to life, this type of wisdom, earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. And I see that in our country. I see that we think that, man, if we can just build this comfort and luxury and all these things for ourselves, then that's going to lead to this good life. But what I see, guys, is we are killing ourselves and killing each other trying to pursue what we think is going to bring us happiness, right? We're shooting ourselves in the foot by chasing selfish ambition, by going after comfort and luxury and all these things. And James just calls that out and says, that's demonic. Man, if that isn't an indictment on the way that we often live our lives, I don't know what is. And you see it across the board, whether it be, the materialism we talked about some a couple weeks ago, our politics, again, how we communicate, how we do not treat each other kindly, whether it's on the internet or in person. The reason that this is so dark and that this is just having such negative effects in our lives is it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Now look at this next phrase. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. You might underline the word every in that verse. Every evil practice. Guys, think about this, right? Like we think about what is the root, what is the source of all evil, right? We talk about money. There's a passage that says, money is the source of all kinds of evil. We may talk about pride. We may talk about different things. But James is saying, bitter envy and selfish ambition, where you find those, you will find every evil practice. Okay? Are you catching what he's doing here? He's trying not to pull any punches. He's trying to paint it exactly as it is, that these things are the root and source causes for every kind of evil practice. Now, I hope as we read that, you hear that and just do a heart check on yourself. One of the things I've learned in life is that we have a lot of surface issues, right? A lot of surface behaviors. You could probably very easily, if I were talking to you, you'd be like, yeah, I probably need to work on this. I struggle with this. I need to address this in my life. But the reality is there are source issues that are feeding those things. Many of you have heard me share about one of the defining life struggles for me is pornography. That for a lot of my life, I'd struggled with pornography. And one of the greatest insights that I ever learned, it was in my first time in counseling, was that I thought it was all about this behavior, right? But my therapist helped to show me, Matt, like that's a surface level symptom of root issues that are feeding that. That was huge for me. I kind of had lived in this illusion that if I can just get rid of this in my life will be perfect. It'll be good. Like, this is the one blemish on my life. Get rid of that. I'm good to go. I'll be a good person. But what I realized, even as God brought healing in that area, kind of peeled back that surface level symptom or behavior, that there was this whole chasm of brokenness underneath that. That all these things that I didn't trust people. I didn't know how to cope with difficult emotions. I didn't know how to build intimate relationships where I was being filled with good, healthy things that God intended. There was fear, there was pride, there was control, there were all these things down deep within me. And I thought it was all this one behavior on top. But it was actually these source issues feeding that behavior. So even as we read this description in James, I invite you guys to look at what are those root or source issues in your life. It's not just a struggle with food or money or anger or relationships. It's not just those things. If you think that's it, you're missing the reality that there's something below that. So I just invite you and challenge you. Say, God, what are the root issues in me? Is it these things? Is there envy in my life? Is there jealousy? Am I really unhappy with my life because I want that person's life? I want what that person has. Is it selfish ambition? Are you just out to kind of, get what's good for you, but kind of, putting as a lower priority what's good for other people? And man, I confess, like, so much of my life I have made it about my own selfish ambition, my accomplishments, my achievements, advancing. So often I have done everything I can to advance myself, but I've done that to where I've said, okay, I'm not going to think about how that affects this person or how it takes time away from my wife or kids or different people in my life. I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna work hard and I'm gonna do really well and succeed. But the reality is that leaves this wake or aftermath of hurt people or neglected people in my life. And I've had to see that and confess that to my wife, to my kids, to other people. There's been times in my life where I have put my own advancement ahead of, the well-being of my wife, my kids, my family members, my friends. So I see that in me. And maybe that's something that you can identify in you, that you're saying, yeah, that is in my life. And maybe that does explain all these other evil practices, all these other unhealthy things that bubble up within me. Let's keep reading. Verse 17. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. I love this. There's not too many places, when you look at the lists in the Bible, the fruit of the Spirit, or, these different places that talk about virtues and things like that. There's not a lot of them that start with purity. That says the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. And I love this picture because I think it's another one of those things that we desperately need in our culture, is purity. And man, because of my struggle with pornography, I know impurity, right? For so long in my life, I had fed impurity into my life. And so I remember there was a point for me where, in Solomon's life, King Solomon's life, there's that story kind of at the beginning of his reign that God says, ask me for one thing, I'll give you anything you want. Ask me for anything. And Solomon could have asked for a lot of different things, but he asked for wisdom. And God says, good answer. And because you asked for wisdom, now I will also give you, wealth and power and success and all these different things. He asked for wisdom. I remember one point in my life I was thinking about that. And I said, you know what, God? If you asked me that question, I think my answer would be purity. What I want more than anything in my life is purity. And I've ruined that, I've trashed that, but I hunger for that. I desire for purity. Because you know what comes with purity? Peace. A clean conscience. Sleep. Rest. I know for so many of the years that I carried secrets in my life, I was restless, and I didn't sleep well, and I never could give my focus and attention fully to God or people in my life because I was kind of perpetuating the cycle of guilt and shame, and it just, I think Proverbs maybe 5 and 6, when it's talking about purity and avoiding lust, it talks about how lust can steal the best of your years and the best of your strength. And I experienced that. I experienced that early on in life where it stole the best of me away. But as God brought healing in my life, as God started to rebuild purity into my life, I'll tell you, to live without secrets is a very peaceful thing, a very restful thing. You're not worried about being found out. You're not worried about, oh gosh, I'm saying I'm one thing and I'm struggling with these things in secret. There's this peace that comes with congruence. In Celebrate Recovery, we have the phrase we often say, you're only as sick as your secrets. And I can attest to that on both sides of the fence. I've been very sick with secrets before, and I've also experienced how healthy and whole you can be when you don't have any, when everything's just out on the table. And so purity is something that, man, I just long for in my own life, and I long for you. God, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, the pure in heart will see God. There's something beautiful that comes with purity because there's not all these things sitting in between us and God. So the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. Then secondly, it's peace-loving. I didn't even see that as I talked about how purity and peace are related, right? When we're pure, we experience peace. We love peace, and we long for peace with others. It is considerate. Do we take time to think about other people as we're going through our day, through our week? Man, I can't tell you guys the power of one little text or one little note or one little Facebook message. Actually, when I was preaching 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in the office early in the morning, and this gentleman's name popped into my head. Haven't thought about this guy for months. Hadn't popped into my head. I'd met him at Celebrate Recovery, and I was like, that's strange. Let's shoot him a text, let him know I'm thinking of him and praying for him. So when I'm in sermon prep mode, I'm usually not thinking about anybody else. I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to get up there and in an hour, and I gotta get ready. But this guy's name pops into my head. I shoot him a text and just say, hey man, thinking about you, praying for you. He texted me back later that day. He said, if ever there was a moment that confirmed the existence of a God, this is it. The fact that you would text me on this very morning after the week I've had and the things that I've been through, there's no coincidence to it. It could only be God. So I took 30 seconds and shot this guy a text, thought of someone other than myself and acted on it, and it kind of reconfirmed and encouraged him that God was there, God cared for him. So I want to encourage you guys to think, what are those little things, little ways that you can respond, that you can be considerate of others, that you can step out of the massive to-do list and all the things that you have to do, and say, you know what, I'm gonna send that person a note. I'm gonna take a moment to pray for them. I'm gonna bring them a meal. I'm gonna ask if I can watch their kids. Whatever I can do to that would be meaningful in their life. How can we consider others? Submissive. We love that word, right? Submission has kind of come to be this, just this bad word in our culture, and we wrestle with that idea of submission because it means giving up control and power and being able to call the shots. But how do we submit first and foremost to God, trusting, like I talked about a couple weeks ago, that He's the guy that can cast out demons and calm the storms and calm the sea? Maybe it'd be okay to submit to the guy that has that kind of power, right? And even in submitting to others, maybe it's not about us winning all the time. Maybe it's about us taking a loss so that person can win. Maybe I don't get ahead in my life, my pursuits, my interests. Maybe I actually take a loss so that person can get ahead. How do I submit to people in my life, people around me? Not worry about power, but worry about the well-being and the dignity of people in my life. Full of mercy and good fruit. We talked earlier in James, there's that great verse in James that says, mercy triumphs over judgment. I love that phrase. You see it lived out in the life of Jesus so beautifully, right? He had every right to judge. Woman caught in the act of adultery, guys, standing there with stones cocked back, ready to kill her. They said, hey, the law of Moses says someone's caught in adultery, we should kill them. And Jesus, instead of in that moment choosing judgment, he chooses mercy. He says, hey, any of you who've never sinned before, go ahead, throw the first stone. They all leave slowly. Jesus says to the woman, has no one stayed to condemn you? She says, no one, Rabbi. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. Jesus beautifully lives out this picture of we lead with mercy, not judgment and condemnation. And man, we could use a little bit more of that in our culture. How quick we are to throw stones, how quick we are to judge, how quick we are to argue or debate. Jesus says, no, mercy triumphs over judgment, not judgment over mercy. And then impartial and sincere. K. Paul preached a while back about how James challenges us. Do we show favoritism to those who seem to have power and influence and money and wealth? Do we look at, oh man, if I get in good graces with that person, I'm going to benefit from that? No, he says, don't show favoritism to the rich man who walks in fine clothes. Treat with dignity and respect the poor person that walks in, because they too are created in the image of God and loved by God. And then finally in this passage, James says, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Different translations of righteousness say, reap a harvest of justice, or reap a harvest of good things. I don't know if you know this, but we have an election coming up, not too far in the distant future. And I think that one of these things, one of the applications of this last verse is how do we sow seeds of peace? How do we sow seeds of not looking at people and where they sit on which side of the political aisle they sit, but how do we sow seeds of peace and say, you know what, even if that person's on the other side of the aisle from me, they're created in the image of God. Jesus died on the cross for them. God loves them dearly. How do I show God's love and how do I create peace? An incredible opportunity to do that, not just in politics, but in so many places in our life. Jesus not only says, blessed are the pure in heart, he says, blessed are the peacemakers. How do we sow peace? So James is holding out these two paths, these two choices to us. He's saying you can choose this wisdom. Door number one holds earthly wisdom, but with earthly wisdom comes bitter envy, selfish ambition, and with that comes disorder in every evil practice. Or you choose the second path, and James holds out, maybe you could even look at this as another kind of fruit of the Spirit type of list, and that involves purity and peace, being considerate of others, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So he holds out those two options and says, I invite you in. I invite you to choose which of these. I think of, I believe it was Moses who says in Deuteronomy kind of, this day I hold before you life or death. I hold before you the way of God or the way of selfishness, the way of death. And I invite you, choose life that you may live. Choose this life to the fullest that God welcomes us into. Did you know he doesn't tell us all these commands and all these things, just because he's a party pooper and he wants to ruin our lives? God knows that the best form of life on the planet is in his way. He's like the wise parent that the little 5-year-old thinks they know best, and they want to eat candy all the time, and they want to stay up late, and they want to do all these things. But God says, no, I know the way to a whole and healthy and full life. Choose life. Choose life. Don't choose earthly, unspiritual, demonic wisdom. It's just going to lead to death and heartache and pain and suffering. Choose the wisdom that comes from me so that you might live. I invite you to step more into that. Consider both of these things this morning. The places where there's bitter envy and selfish ambition in your life, and like we talked about a couple weeks ago, how we invite God to uproot those trees from our lives. And then consider how you can plant trees of peace and purity and submissiveness and being considerate of others and all these things. I invite you to consider these things this morning as we pray.